All right, today we're putting on our detective hats. We are going on a hunt for the real origin of a symbol you have definitely seen probably 1,000 times. It's a symbol that's supposed to define one of the biggest ideas out there, sustainability.
Okay, so let's dive right in. I mean, you know this one, right? You've seen it everywhere. It's plastered on corporate reports, it's in textbooks, it's all over government websites. It's that classic three-circle diagram. Environment, economy, and social. And sustainability, well, that's supposed to be right there in the middle, that little sweet spot where they all overlap. It's presented like it's just common sense, a fundamental truth.
But here's the real mystery. Where did this thing actually come from? Like, who first drew it? And if you go looking for an answer, it gets surprisingly murky really fast. The origin story for this symbol is anything but simple. So today, we're going to follow the breadcrumbs, dig into the clues, and see if we can uncover the hidden story behind this simple picture.
So, our investigation kicks off with a search for what you might call the source code, or what academics call the or text. Basically, we're looking for that original document, that aha moment where someone first sketched out these three intersecting circles.
The only problem is, there isn't really one. Seriously. The whole three-pillar idea is so common now that people just use it without citing anything, as if it's some kind of law of physics. But it's not. It was created by people, and how it was created, well, that tells a really fascinating story about a big battle of ideas.
So to get to the bottom of this, we have to jump in a time machine. We're going back to the world right after World War II. It was an era that was just completely captivated by one single, really powerful idea.
And that one big idea? It was economic development. Pretty much everyone agreed that the #1 goal for every nation on Earth, especially what they called less advanced countries back then, was to raise the material well-being of its people. And, it didn't take long for that goal to basically become a synonym for just one thing, economic growth.
But then we get to the late 1960s, the early 70s, and you start to see cracks forming in that consensus. A pretty big backlash started brewing against this whole growth at all costs model. And what's interesting is that it was coming from two totally different directions at the same time.
So these were the two big critiques. On one side, you had the environmental movement. This is when you get books like The Limits to Growth, with people arguing, hey, wait a minute, endless economic expansion on a planet with finite resources, that's just a recipe for disaster. Then on the other side, you had the social critique. These folks were pointing out that, okay, great, the economy is growing, but poverty and inequality are still massive problems. The wealth just wasn't trickling down like it was supposed to.
Okay, so you see the dilemma, right? You've got this engine of progress, economic growth, and it's being called out for being both an environmental nightmare and socially unfair. So heading into the 1970s, people started scrambling, really desperately looking for a way to square this circle, to somehow reconcile all these competing ideas.
And this whole search started creating a brand new language. First, you get the Stockholm Conference in 1972. That was one of the first big global attempts to connect development with the environment. Then this idea of eco-development starts popping up, trying to mesh social and economic goals with, not destroying the planet. And then, and this is a big one, in 1980, the term sustainable development makes its first major appearance in this big report called the World Conservation Strategy.
So you can kind of see how the debate is heating up, right? It kicks off with that pretty radical critique in '72. Then we get these early attempts at a solution in 1980. But the year you really need to pay attention to is 1987. That year is a total game changer because two completely different visions for the future get published almost at the exact same time.
And that brings us to a huge breakthrough in our detective story. Because in 1987, after all these years of back and forth, a picture finally emerges.
And there it is. This is the first known appearance of the three intersecting circles diagram we're looking for. It showed up in a paper by an economist named Edward Barbier, and he's using it to talk about how biological, economic, and social systems all interact. So, case closed, right? It looks like we found our origin.
But not so fast. Here comes the plot twist. In that very same year, 1987, the United Nations drops its massive landmark report, Our Common Future. You might know it as the Brundtland Report. And the definition of sustainable development in that report would become way more influential. And crucially, it had a very, very different opinion on the role of the economy.
And this quote right here, this is basically the smoking gun. The UN report didn't just say economic growth was okay. It called for, and I'm quoting here, forceful economic growth. It was arguing that more growth was actually the solution to our problems. I mean, this was a 180-degree turn from those early critiques we talked about.
Okay,
So let's take stock. We've got two key pieces of evidence, both from 1987. We have a diagram showing three equal interlocking systems, and we have this super powerful political report that puts economic growth right back in the driver's seat. And it's right here, in the tension between these two things, that the true story of our symbol really comes out.
This really gets to the heart of the conflict. You had the early critics who were basically saying economic growth is the problem. But the UN's Brundtland report completely flipped the script. It said, no, economic growth is the solution. We just need to make it, sustainable.
So what's the final verdict from our little investigation? Well, it turns out the three-pillar model wasn't invented by a single person in a lab somewhere. It's what's called an emergent concept. It just sort of arose out of this messy, decades-long debate between all these different groups who had totally different ideas about the future. And why did the UN's version, that pro-growth, win-win story, become the dominant one? The one that we all kind of see embedded in that diagram today. It's because it was an absolutely brilliant political compromise. It meant that nobody had to fundamentally challenge the economic status quo. Everyone could just nod and agree. But that compromise came with a price. The model that came out of it was powerful, sure, but it was also incredibly vague. It let everybody agree on balancing the three pillars without anyone ever having to get specific about what balance really means in practice. It essentially swept that huge fundamental conflict over economic growth right under the rug and hid it inside three simple, friendly-looking circles. So here's the real takeaway. That simple diagram isn't just a neutral scientific model. It's more like a truce, a visual ceasefire in a long, ongoing battle of ideas. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? The next time you see that symbol, maybe on a website or in a company report, just ask yourself, am I looking at a blueprint for actually balancing these systems? Or am I looking at a beautiful picture that's designed to hide a really deep and still unresolved conflict? And maybe, just maybe, that hidden conflict is a big reason we still struggle so much to get sustainability right.
Let's be real. If you're in business today, you're getting pulled in two different directions. Be sustainable, but also be profitable. It can feel like you're walking a tightrope. So how in the world do you figure out which green initiatives are just expensive PR and which ones will actually help your bottom line? Well, let's find out.
Profit, people, or planet. For so long, we've been told it's a trade-off, that you have to pick one over the others. But what if that's not actually true? We're about to dive into a massive study that went inside hundreds of factories to see what really works. And trust me, some of the answers are going to surprise you. All right, so let's get into this sustainability puzzle. Everybody's talking about it, but if you're a manager trying to make decisions, it's so hard to know, is this a genuine strategy that's going to pay off in the long run, or am I just throwing money at a PR problem? To solve this, we're going to skip all the opinions and go straight to the hard data. The insights we're looking at today come from a huge survey. We're talking over 500 manufacturing plants in 19 different countries. So this isn't some academic theory. This is what's actually happening on the ground, on the factory floor. Now, before we get to which actions work, we got to know how we're keeping score, right? How do you even measure what sustainable success looks like? Well, turns out there's a really powerful framework for this, and it's called the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line, or TBL for short, is a pretty profound idea when you think about it. It basically says that a truly successful company can't just look at its profits. Nope, it has to measure its performance across three key areas: economic, environmental, and social. It's about getting the full picture of a company's real impact. So let's break that down real quick. You've got planet, that's your environmental footprint. Then you've got people, that's all about your social impact, your reputation, how you treat everyone. And finally, profit. And this is a really key detail for this study. Profit was measured by looking at manufacturing costs. So a positive result for the profit pillar means your costs actually go down. That's the goal here. Okay, now that we have our scorecard set, let's get to the first big reveal. What actually happens when companies focus on sustainability programs inside their own operations? So the researchers looked at two main types of internal programs. On one hand, you've got the environmental actions, things like designing recyclable products, cutting down on waste, making your processes way more energy efficient. And on the other hand, you have social actions, which are all about people, improving safety, creating better working conditions, supporting projects in the local community.
And here it is, our first major finding. Just look at that environmental row. Check marks all the way across the board. It is a certified triple win. It's good for the planet, it's good for people, and, this is huge, it lowers your manufacturing costs, which means it's great for profit. But now, look at this social row. It's also great for the planet and people, but that profit column? A big red X. These programs actually increase your costs. And that's the exact trade-off that keeps managers up at night. Yeah, that trade-off is absolutely crucial to understand. The study put it plainly. Those internal social programs are fantastic for social and environmental performance, but that investment comes at a direct financial cost, at least in the short term, right there on the factory floor. So that's the story inside the factory, but we all know a company's impact doesn't just stop at its own loading dock. What happens when they try to make their suppliers more sustainable? Let's take a look. This is such a massive challenge for pretty much every modern business, right? A company can be doing everything right internally, but if its supply chain isn't on the same page, the overall impact is pretty limited. So what's the best way to get them on board? Well, the study found that companies usually try one of two things. The first is what they call assessment. You can just think of this as watching. It's all about monitoring your suppliers, running audits, making them sign codes of conduct. The second strategy is collaboration. This is more like partnering. It's where you actively work with your suppliers, share what you know, and actually help them get better. So which one do you think works? Well, the result for that first approach is, honestly, it's pretty stunning. The data shows that just assessing your suppliers, that whole watching them approach, has zero impact. None. It doesn't help the planet, it doesn't help people, and it definitely doesn't help your profits. The study is crystal clear. It's basically a waste of time and energy. But what about that partnering approach? Well, as you can see, it is the exact opposite. Actively collaborating with your suppliers turns out to be another triple win. It boosts environmental performance, social performance, and your economic performance. The lesson here couldn't be clearer. It's about partnering, not policing. That's what gets results. Okay, so we've looked at all this incredible data. Now for the most important part. What do we do with it? How do we turn these insights into a real strategy? Let's boil it all down into a super simple two-step playbook. It really just comes down to this. Step 1, start inside your own four walls. Put your energy into internal environmental programs, things like waste reduction or green product design. The data shows they are a guaranteed win-win-win across the entire triple bottom line. Then for step 2, when you look outside, partner up. Stop wasting time with just monitoring. Focus your efforts on true hands-on collaboration with your suppliers. That's how you drive real, meaningful improvement for everyone. And this final thought from the researchers just nails it. They say, look, assessment isn't completely useless. It can be a good first step to figure out where the biggest problems are. But just identifying a problem doesn't fix it. The actual improvement, the real change, only happens when you roll up your sleeves and work on it together. So, the data has spoken. Collaboration really is the key that unlocks the whole sustainability payoff. And that leaves us with just one final question, one for you to think about. Who do you need to start working with tomorrow? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.